So let me introduce myself. My name is Ann Lai. I'm a principal at Binary Capital. We led the investment round on Unicorn, which is a betting site for esports. And on the side, I've also been involved in the gaming community since I used to work at Riot, and I still help out pro bono as an advisor to a lot of esports startups and teams and players. So I'm actually going to go down the line and just have everyone introduce themselves, because they can do it probably better than I can, and then we can take it from there.
Cool, thanks, Ann. My name is Ko Kim. I'm head of business development, operations, and marketing at Mobcrush, which is a live stream platform for mobile games. Previously, before joining this company last year, I was one of the Google Play Games partnerships leads. I led up international market growth and practically was one of the first 2 people on that team. And so did a lot of cool stuff there, evaluating new growth opportunities, specifically in VR, streaming, and a lot of different technologies, and then thought this was pretty cool, so came here.
Awesome. I'm Cinco Barnes. Been a game designer since around 1995. Founded with a few partners Austin's Spacetime Studios, which we did Legends games on mobile, which was a real-time 3D MMO back in 2010. And we've stayed up with the real-time competitive market on mobile with last year's Call of Champions. And that's my story.
Great. My name is Clinton Foy, and I've been in the games industry for about 15, 20 years. Most recently, I am a venture capitalist and managing director at Crosscut Ventures. We're based in Los Angeles. We invest in video games, in interactive, in esports, and most recently I've invested in an esports team called the Immortals. And the Immortals is ranked #1 in North America for League of Legends. I also invested in Ko's company, Mobcrush, and Super Evil Megacorp, and Vainglory, and a company called Vulcan, which started off doing daily fantasy betting. So, and Instant Esports. So I'm maybe probably one of the biggest nerds in the room, I guess. I don't know.
You're addicted to investing in esports.
Okay. So go ahead, Ann.
All right, great. So I think over the course of the last couple of days, today and yesterday, we've all heard a lot about esports in general, right? And PC gaming and esports. I think everyone would love to get a little bit of idea about where we are in terms of mobile and esports, and what you guys think from your different perspectives right now.
Do you want me to start? Should we go down the line?
Go ahead.
Cool. So I think mobile and esports is actually pretty interesting, because a lot of people had probably a lot of skepticism towards it, as like, you know, how can you have highly competitive play on a mobile touchscreen device? But I think the different way to think about it is thinking about the opportunity of what happens when a video competitive gaming becomes a lot more accessible to a wider variety of players. To me, you know, as PC console games continue to kind of flourish, and a lot of the current competitive gaming landscape has been focused on those 2 platforms, the install base for both those platforms is kind of dwarfed by the 2.1 billion mobile devices that are out there, with an actual basically annual churn rate for most of these things. So I think the next thing to really think about is, you know, how can one take the mobile touchscreen and create a mobile, like, kind of a competitive gaming experience? And a lot of game companies has done it, or have tried to make, or made tons of attempts to do it. Cinco from Spacetime has done it with one of their games, and then we have Vainglory that has currently kind of been a little bit slowly growing in kind of like that MOBA space. We currently seen Clash Royale from Supercell making that attempt into synchronous real-time multiplayer. So it's definitely happening. I think what's really more interesting is when mobile games are basically being designed and developed to be watched, which is something that I've seen as a trend, even with talking to game developers this year. So I definitely think there's a lot of exciting things coming our way, because people are thinking about it.
Yeah, they are. It's kind of a big deal when you look at the technology platform. But speaking further about what this phenomenon is all about, players and the people that love the play make an esport, and people like me as developers have a a strangely limited role in our overall participation for what esport is like in the future, which has been one of the very interesting challenges for a traditional developer to understand, is that we have to do more work in the creation of a more complex game than we ever have, but then that really just becomes a footnote, because then it becomes about creating a community that can fall in love with the game. And for mobile, there's a variety of prejudices against what the existence of competitive gaming. And for my own story, we definitely looked at some older demographics, and people loved playing competitive games when we put out our game last year, and have subsequently learned that the market that's growing is actually very different, very young, and totally resonant with what you expect for mobile gaming. But interesting nonetheless, and it's a younger crowd that has a different perspective on the validity of competition on mobile.
So I agree with what Ko and Sxsw said, and just for maybe a historical framework, I mean, we're really early, I think, for esports, and super early for mobile esports. I mean, video games have really only been around for, what, 30, 35 years, tops, and competitive gaming really only for 20 years, maybe at most. So I think mobile games and mobile esports, it really only started maybe 2 years ago, and that was it. So I think we're in the beginning of something that can get a lot bigger. And I mean, I can't wait to see the next Riot games on mobile, pop up, or the next Valve type or Blizzard type publisher pop up that's working on competitive gaming or on platforms. And that's, as a venture capitalist, what I'm really interested in seeing. So if anybody's working on that, let me know. I'll talk to you guys about it. We'd love to fund that.
Also, I think we all brought up a little bit about community, about different types of games. Actually, Clinton, having invested both in Mobcrush and also in Vainglory, and also being a chairman for a esports organization, what do you think, when are you going to invest in a mobile team for esports? And how do you think about it, and how would you consider what titles would be good for that?
Yeah, so good question. I think it's early, like I said, but we've been looking at Vainglory. I mean, I love Vainglory. I play it almost every day. And I think if there are any esports fans out there, so TSM, Team Solomid, just bought a Vainglory team, one of the top Vainglory teams out there. I'm sure I see the CLG, out there in the crowd. Maybe they're looking at it as well, but there's other esports organizations like G2 that have bought a Vainglory team. So I think it's happening, but again, it's only really been around for about 1.5 years since it launched out of beta. So we're definitely going to look at it. I mean, there's probably, for Immortals, 3 or 4 top games that we're looking at right now. We started off with League of Legends just because it's the biggest one in the world right now, with 100 million, active players. Vainglory's, is starting to get there. And if you actually look at where Vainglory is, and map it against where Riot Games and League of Legends was 10 years ago, when it launched out of beta, I think Vainglory is actually a little bit higher in terms of monthly active users, daily active users, and monetization. So again, it's early, but we're looking at it for sure. I'd love to get into it.
And one of the interesting things is like when we talk about community too, we also have to think about how do other players and fans and like all them, they kind of congregate and talk and discuss and kind of connect over the game as well, right? I think what Twitch has done really well, especially for the PC console space, is enabled literally whoever has internet access and like kind of like at the time, desktop web, but now as I go through the mobile apps, the ability to view and watch some of their favorite teams and players kind of compete over this game, right? And then for some of these players are even aspiring, amateurs that hope to be like the next like kind of Faker or all these other top players, right? Like they have the ability to stream and then also kind of get discovered by some of these teams. And so if you look at the mobile space right now, there isn't really a platform for that either, for spectation and broadcasting. I'd like to say I'm working at a company company that's trying to do that, but it's also a really hard problem, right? Because not everyone in the world has access to a 2 to 3K PC with a powerful GPU and CPU set, an Elgato capture card, webcam, microphones, and also really good broadband internet access, right? That's, if you think about 80–90% of the world, they do not have access to any of those things, let alone a dedicated broadband network. For us, what's exciting is on mobile, we're having these countries like Indonesia, Philippines, parts of LATAM that are getting their first high-powered connected device for the first time. That's a huge number when you think about scale in itself. And so, which is also a harder problem because you have to think about how do you allow that spectation or a lot of those kind of community interactions to occur at any given point at any different time, right? And so it's entirely different, I would say, user experience you'd have to think about than the traditional, let's say, desktop web experience that both Twitch and YouTube have come out about like basically 8 to 10 years ago.
Well, so I think that brings up a good point. I think, you know, one of the biggest drivers for esports becoming much more popular now is the fact that Twitch existed, right? That there's that accessibility. I also think the launch of Twitch has evolved, caused evolution in the game dev side itself, right? People are thinking about how to better spectate, how to better treat that viewing community experience from a game dev perspective. So we'd love to kind of get a little bit on what you think, Sxsw, maybe on, you know, given a platform like Mobcrush where we could get more context, more accessibility around the game and a different type of audience, how does the game dev think about that spectator experience or building out that type of feature for communities?
Well, it adds to the complexity of making the game in the first place because like, we're definitely down the road of in terms of what MOBAs came out for iOS and Android. But by the time we were developing Call of Champions last year, we knew that we had to include the whole game, but we also needed to have a spectator feature, and then we needed to have a global chat system, we had to have a good onboarding, and a whole bunch of other stuff that it's important to have that because the application and the community requires it. But like I said before, that whole effort of development is just subsumed by the community and is, again, an afterthought. It winds up being a very small play with a ton of effort. It's like a quasar of effort, and in terms of its overall relationship to the success within the community, it is largely about the personalities then that find the platform and connect on a human basis because the folks who are playing and succeeding with this are fundamentally competitive types, getting their self-esteem from winning the game. And that weeds out a lot of gameplay. I mean, as game designers, we broke our self-esteem by challenges in a controlled environment. In a competitive game, those controls are outside your periphery, and you're dealing with the brutality of a horrible beatdown when you're out of rank comparison. Or in the case of the community, you have the opportunity to drive this tremendous emotion surrounding this new thing. I think if anything, what we need to do as developers is we need to rise to the state of the art and then subsequently give tools and be there for the community thought leaders from a creative and a lore standpoint, letting people behind the curtain, talking to folks and give them special information, and just make an alliance with those people who are driving all of the other entertainment.
And so we talked about, you've brought up community a couple of times, so let's spend a little time talking about that, right? We've brought up a little bit about how the mobile community is different than the PC community. Would love to hear a little bit more about, from different perspectives, how you guys see those as different or where you think they'll evolve to and how that might affect the gameplay that exists for esports in mobile. Right, because like right now it sounds like there's a lot more diversity potentially. There's a different audience at a different age bracket. Does that mean we're looking at potentially different features, different types of gameplay, or where do you think that might be and where it's differentiated?
Let's see. This is a very, very complex as a multiple structured question. So let's break it down. So
Yeah.
Let's say the type of gaming that occurs on a mobile device versus, let's say, a console PC. The use cases for each of that is probably going to be very different. Console PC, likely at home gameplay sessions are probably going to be at least about 2 hours, I would say, probably, right? can't imagine anyone playing less than like 2 League of Legends matches, especially if one is at least 50 minutes long. Or in general cases, if you're sitting for a sit-down, lean-back experience, either in the living room or in the bedroom or in a desk scenario, you're likely to have longer gameplay sessions, much more immersive environments, more complicated control inputs, keyboard, mouse, gamepad. That's a lot more buttons to touch, right? Versus, let's say, a mobile. And so that's probably what the different, probably just functionally, like, or at least what those use cases are. But what's interesting with mobile is it's a little bit more ad hoc because you could have, I would say, a lot more kind of come in, come out gameplay experiences. You're not necessarily, there are definitely cases where people sit down, actually the most amount of time in sessions for a lot of mobile games actually occur before bedtime, I think, in bed. So, by the way. But also around rush hour is also another big time period, but that makes sense, right? In commuter hours in Russia, or not in Russia, but in Asia, people are commuting at homes at average an hour, if not more, each way. And then all those markets have second-gen LTE. I mean, when I was in Korea 2 years ago, I was getting a half a gig download and upload, so in the subway.
Are you saying that people are playing and driving at the same time, too?
Well, there
playing
is
and riding, right?
Playing and riding in the subway, probably. But I also would not put against the probably if they're being driven, but they're probably playing too because they're stuck in traffic. But I would actually venture to say that probably the length of time you would see on a mobile game player and a PC game player is probably pretty similar if you look at the most engaged players. It's like I would definitely say there's a lot more sessions because the average gameplay session is shorter on a mobile, clearly, but in terms of length of time, especially if you look at the top 1% of players, they're about the same. So a lot of it's just different, right? It's just a different gameplay experience. A touchscreen gameplay experience is going to be very different than what a immersive PC shooter is. But then again, our most popular games on our beta right now are the mobile versions of every popular game on Twitch. So I don't think genres are any much different at all. So.
Clinton, do you have something to add?
No, I think that's right. I think that the most engaged players, I mean, we found at Super Evil Megacorp and Vainglory, I think we can probably say we're the leading mobile esport right now. That average use of the app was somewhere around 90 minutes to 2 hours per day, and it actually trended up in Japan and in Korea.
Got it.
Yeah.
Cinco, actually, so Call of Champions is a pretty fast game, right? And you were looking at much shorter single game sessions. How do you think about this type of like gameplay time?
Well, we looked at it a couple of different ways. I mean, first of all, we wanted to be early with esport, but we also wanted to be early with the variations that we thought would fit right for the screen time and the way that people use their mobile devices. So the game is actually built to end in 5 minutes, more like a fight. And the way that works for us is we still have this core dedicated group that plays for hours at a stretch, but we have the ability for them to chunk it up into 5-minute increments, much like our Legends series, which is an MMO. You would play an individual dungeon for somewhere around like maybe 7 to 10 minutes on the average, but you're able to string those sessions together, finding different friends if you were a peer leader or whatnot, and wind up spending a ton of time there. But what we learned with that, and I think also with Call of Champions, was that there's a PC in the house, somebody else is using it. Our demographic tends to be on their mobile devices in order to find their video game entertainment. They're not able to spend as much time, and they've got a house full of people who need to do the taxes, who are the older brother or the older sister who needs to play League of Legends, and you need to get on your iPad in order to do that. So I think it drives, from a creative design perspective, our focus a bit younger than we would expect if we were in a different market, different platform.
Got it.
The audience demo is an interesting point too, because if you think about what the first gaming device for, let's say, any person right now, like the first, it's usually going to be their mobile phone, and then these are going to be, I'm sure if many of you have children, nephews, or nieces, what you can probably ask them what do they want for Christmas. It's probably an iOS or a phone, or like basically a smartphone or a tablet is my guess, right? If I had to take a guess. Yeah, it's not a Nintendo DS. It's not it's not a game console for sure, right? It's a mobile device. So if you think about where they're starting with first, of course, a large, dominant, probably demo is going to be that younger audience, but they are definitely that mobile-first kind of content creation and consumption generation. So which is really interesting on one hand because we're probably going to be the last of the desktop generation right now, right? In terms of desktop console gaming generation. We're entering an era where a large number of people are going to be gaming on mobile first. And what does that mean, right, in terms of like how their player behaviors are going to change and how they're going to evolve, so.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, if you look 5 years out from now and you look at long-term demographics, there are cord cutters, and most of us in the room are cord cutters, and then there's a whole generation of cord nevers, people who never are going to have a cable television subscription. And you know, our kids are probably never going to grow up with that. They're just going to have an unconnected, I mean, just a connected mobile device. And I think those are the gamers and kind of the esports players of the future. And that's the future that I look at is 5 to 10 years from now, what does that look like? Who's actually going to be playing? And I just have faith that the 2.5 million connected touchscreen devices, 2.5 billion, sorry, or 3 billion touchscreen devices, there's going to be a market of players out there who want to play the same way that we play League of Legends or Dota or Counter-Strike.
Especially at the rate of upgrades and then also just improvement in internal mobile kind of GPU and CPU units right now. It's already estimated that probably by 2017, the top-end smartphone devices are going to have just amount as graphical power than current Xbox One and PS4. So if you think about it, hardware is going to be a commodity pretty soon. And it's really going to be about what's that software and platform layers on top of all those hardware.
Well, so if we're talking about, right, I think with controllers, with PCs, all of this, we have different types of gameplay that's evolved.
Yep.
If you guys were predicting what type of gameplay will evolve on mobile, I feel like a lot of games right now are trying to cast certain types of PC games into a mobile form factor, right? What do you think will be next? Or what do you think will be the new gameplay type that might come out?
It's a hard question. I'm still holding out for, let's see, like currently we have a lot of card battle games. There's some MOBAs. I'm still waiting for a decent RTS. That's kind of like like if I can get back to StarCraft, I probably would want to do that. But I haven't seen a good RTS on mobile. Shooters, people say, but I think shooters has a control input issues more so than I would say, and that's kind of hard to do on a mobile device, although I'm being proven wrong by like 12-year-olds right now with some mobile shooters, and so, but I think like there's some really other interesting genres too, right? Like sports games are very interesting. I mean, those are like, I mean, that's like obvious, right? Like can't believe there hasn't been a good one on mobile in one sense. I think there's going to be some interesting things to be done in AR, VR, depending on how that platform shapes into play, because I truly think VR and AR as a platform is only going to reach scale through mobile. Once it doesn't have a cord, I think that's when we're going to get a lot of people adopting VR very quickly, and AR to extent. So I'm still holding out for music rhythm games too, but that's apparently people have abandoned that.
A competitive rhythm game.
Competitive rhythm game. I mean,
good.
like music production, most of it's done on a MacBook right now, so it can't be that hard to do it on a thing. So live Scratch competitions. So.
It sounds pretty fun, actually. I like that.
Maybe that's the next one, Cinco.
All right. Good. We didn't mention
I'm
it.
like endless when it comes to games.
So I agree that, I mean, there are just, we're just scratching the surface right now. And for the most part, what you see on mobile and mobile esports is taking PC and then taking a spin on it, maybe simplifying it, trying to get it to its core, and then putting it on mobile and touchscreen interface. And we're just starting to see some shooters out there that could turn into esports on mobile. And I'd like to see more. I think somebody's eventually going to figure it out. There are kids, I mean, 10 and 12-year-olds who are just natively growing up on their touchscreen devices right now on their mobiles. That's all they're going to play on for their entire lives. They're never going to touch a PC. And they're going to want to have shooters. And they're going to want to play competitively. And so I'd like to see that. I wouldn't mind funding something like that. So if anybody knows of one, let me know. Have you seen
Can't
anything?
tell you everything. Come on.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, it's that 10-year-old. It's that young kid, definitely, because I'm old enough to be prejudiced against shooters on the console, and I play with the mouse. But that doesn't mean that I'm wrong, because as I see the gamer who embraces the controls, they're able to do quite well. And so I think that continuing to seed the young market with quality entertainment on mobile screens is going to give us that market of players and everyone interested in watching it. But in terms of what we'll probably be doing design-wise, my big guess is a lot of merging of some of the buzzword technologies that we're kicking around here at South by, and there's going to be a lot of combination of things based around the dawn of some of our developers employing of deep learning strategies within the way that we already analyze our business. So, we're sort of going cyborg in some ways, and people like me are going to merge with the machine, I guess, at some point. That's what I'm saying.
Definitely, especially with the evolution of a lot of these more wearable softwares, right? Like, it almost combines into mobile into something that's a wireless input that's a lot more like incorporated and less, I guess, removed and artificial feeling. And that might be an interesting component as well,
Yeah.
Tie in some rhythm,
Yeah,
health, competitive.
Fighters, if you look at like 2D fighters, right? Like if you look at Street Fighter, all these things, I mean, that's a very interesting, very competitive. But yeah, I put that in a VR space, that gets really interesting as well. So, of course, streaming or viewing that, the spectation of, let's say, VR games is like another problem altogether, right? Like, that's like even harder, so, but.
Yeah, but it also gives us the option of potentially having like sensory inputs and sensory outputs, right? So like impact, pulse, a lot of these things are coming up in a lot of wearable space, which is pretty interesting, right? We've talked a lot about age diversity. I think it's also worthwhile now to bring up a little bit about like gender diversity. So we've seen that in Vainglory. We have some top pros already who are female. In Hearthstone, we also see more equivalent gender distribution when it comes to players. So how do you guys think about that? Or what have you guys seen so far?
I still think the most hardcore gamers are mobile female gamers, but in Korea, because the amount of some of those match 3 games they play is like kind of astronomical, really good. I have no idea how they do it. But especially if you look at time, like that's a running joke, right? Like you have basically these Asian female gamers are the ones like taking everyone out in a lot of these top mobile games. And they're also some of the biggest spenders as well, and in terms of engagement. But I think it's a great opportunity, right? Like in one hand, it's I think for one thing, there is a social kind of cultural change that's happening within, I would say, the gaming, like kind of like that ethos and like kind of that thing. I mean, for a long time, video games have been very, very, like I would say, restricted or limited by a very bad stereotype. I mean, it's basically, everyone said it's the 18-year-old, 20-year-old in the parents' basement playing World of Warcraft raids. Not that, I mean, I've avoided World of Warcraft. I've played a lot of StarCraft though, but the one thing that I think a lot of it is now, as gaming is becoming a lot more mainstream, as kind of part of pop culture, you're seeing a lot of people are actually playing games for the first time, and it's just becoming acceptable in one thing. So, and a lot of people are starting to embrace it. I mean, I didn't think I'd see the day when Louis Vuitton would grace Lightning from Final Fantasy 13 in their ads. Probably 2 years too early, I think, but it's still like, I mean, that kind of shows how far gaming has come as part of like adopted not only in mainstream culture, but in all these aspirational kind of industries. And so I think there's gonna be a lot of interesting things, especially like as more mobile games, especially since everyone has a device and a lot of them are female. I mean, and then especially in Denver, you're going to see not only female, but a lot of diversity from other markets as well. I think a lot of competitive gaming is still pretty much concentrated in very few markets. I actually can't wait to see some breakout star from Southeast Asia or some of these other markets. So.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah, completely agree that, I mean, to the extent that you can criticize competitive gaming right now or competitive esports, it's that there aren't enough women in it. And there aren't enough games that I think are embracing having women in competitive esports. And I know there's some teams out there that are really working on that. I think CLG is trying to do that. I think, at Immortals, we're definitely looking at that. And when Noah and I came together and co-founded Immortals, we thought we're going to be different. It's just really difficult because part of the community and the base is so firmly male-dominated, and they have a certain perspective on what is esports and what esports should be. But as influencers and as people who invest in esports, we have an obligation, I think, to push it forward and be more inclusive, be more embracing. And I love that Vainglory does that. Vainglory specifically has a lot of female players. Hearthstone does as well. And I think those communities aren't as toxic as some of the other esports communities that we've seen out there.
And even Clash Royale is interesting too, because there's been a lot, that game just recently just launched, and there's definitely very diverse clans, even some of the top 10 clans. I don't think they come from any one country. They're probably all over the world. I know someone in the audience knows answer better than I do, or someone that, but I think that's what's going to really, we're going to see just this influx of, I think I have more esports team asking me about good Clash Royale players that I've seen even some of the other ones too. So it's actually been really interesting that it's cool that a lot more people are now interested and really focused on mobile and want to invest before. So.
Do you have anything to add?
Yeah,
Perspective?
well, a couple of things. I think you're right about the viciousness of female players. So from a historical perspective and from an analytical perspective, from the earliest MMO experiences that I had, female gamers do fantastically well. It's about intelligence, coordination, and the ability to communicate. And culturally, there's a lot of obstacles in some of the traditional esports, but this really fun combination of the accessibility of mobile, the audience that it's driving, and then some of the creative considerations that you have to make in a game like Vainglory, or we have to make in our game, they change that playing field to an extent that there's a reduction in the toxicity. And then by virtue of the preponderance of a better balanced audience, you wind up with a much nicer group. We slapped some global chat in my game right before the end of last year, and I was thinking that it would be a huge, huge mistake, just a big open sewer. But I was completely wrong, and it's the best traditions of a town in an MMO, and not at all what I get from my years of exposure to the traditional or the burgeoning esports community. So in general, I think it's going to be a good thing and more friendly to people of all backgrounds.
Why do you think it is more friendly, actually?
I think it's because of how atomized the devices are and how there's, they're everywhere. They're in everybody's hands. And so like Ko was saying, there's these huge groups of people that are getting their first taste of real love for video game entertainment on these devices. And so I think that it's different culturally than for, let's say, somebody like myself who has enjoyed many years of PC gaming. PC gaming for me, until Facebook, was done entirely by myself. By default, mobile experiences, and I see within the mobile audience, they're social by default and have a different mechanism. And so I think we're taking advantage of that by virtue of the community sort of needing one another and it just being a less generally hostile environment.
You were going to add something?
Well, one of our most popular events that was streamed on our channel was an all-female Vainglory tournament. So, and then even those female players were very skilled players. They were probably some even better than even some of the Vainglory teams that I've seen, right? And I think they really want, and a lot of it is just encouraging people and encouraging everyone to be able to play and kind of cultivating that really kind of nurturing and supportive community. I think the notion of creating communities on mobile is probably relatively new. It's been around in PC gaming and console for a long time, and a lot of mobile gaming has been mostly a single-player experience with very light metas. I think a lot of the clan stuff and all that stuff that's kind of recently, or have popped up in the last year or 2 years or so, has definitely, in some games, people have seen that, and luckily it's been kind of very organic in how those communities have kind of grown and really held together. And so I think like a lot of it is like, you know, especially as there's more synchronous multiplayer games on mobile, you're going to see a lot more, I think, like really good female players are going to start rising up. So
Great. So I think we've covered a lot of ground. Actually, since we're in like a relatively small room, I'm sure everyone has different questions, you know, with these different types of experts on the panel. So we'd love to just open it up and see what you guys have or are curious about or what you guys want to know about. So I guess this stand here is for that.
yeah.
That mic.
So that mic.
I'm actually more curious of all the attendees, who are you are actually working directly in esports or not? Like, okay. And then, let's see, and then like another thing is who hopes to be working in esports, just, all right, okay. So it's like, just so I know who the audience is. What types of questions are
Actually, just for context, how many of you guys know what Mobcrush is? Okay. Oh, that's pretty good.
That's pretty good.
You want to give a brief
like what,
blurb
beta?
for everyone else?
Very short.
Or just what it is.
Blurb, right?
Okay, for everyone who doesn't know yet, here, what is Mobcrush?
Mobcrush is, we are building a live streaming community for mobile games. We're making it really easy for people to stream from a mobile device. So it's a plug and play solution. We fully own our software application stack and all that. It's full. So we're in beta. You can, if you want to check us out, it's mobcrush.com/beta. It's just as easy as actually attaching your iOS device to your MacBook, or pretty soon some of our other stuff. So no capture card, all that needed. So that's kind of what we're doing.
Guys, want to see a live demo down the hall?
Yes, down the hall if you want to see a live demo, it's right over there.
Live streaming. What's it later today? I think Mayhem will be live streaming. There's a TV demo in it as well. Check it out. Yeah. And so that's a little plug, I guess.
Thanks, Ann.
All right. So what questions? We'd love to take some questions. Feel free to just line up at the mic as well if you have more. But yeah, go ahead.
So same question I asked last panel, and I'm going to ask the same thing to the next panel. So future of esports in mobile, what's the biggest threat to its future?
Threat? Oh, I don't know. There's not a lot of threats right now.
What are you worried about? What's something that can cause the future of esports to be not as big or as like awesome or more?
Also, I have a comment on this.
I guess for me is more like people thinking that they can create an esport versus like just letting it organically, then rather focusing on why it became an esport to begin with. I think this year alone, I've probably heard more conversations from developers saying, I'm going to go make an esports game versus no, I'm going to make a really good game that's going to allow a lot of cool interactions and a lot of that stuff. I think the concept of making an esport game is a very dangerous path to walk on because it's your players that make it a competitive sport, not necessarily dictated by the game developer, so, or whoever wants to say that. So I think that's one thing I'd probably would keep in mind. And also just, I would say just accessibility is probably the biggest threat. I still think current esports, the competitive gaming landscape itself is still quite inaccessible, not only just from, let's say, access to hardware or even to games, but even just broadband networks, right? It's very, very, I would say, I mean, it's not, you're not going to get, no one has perfect internet access. I mean, even in the US, we're probably like, what, number 45th country out of the developed world with like broadband internet connection. Like, that's awful. So I'm actually surprised we have some good teams here with that. But I think it, for me, is like versus like game developers or anyone thinking that they can create an esport, the next thing would be accessibility. Is probably like that lack of accessibility is the biggest threat.
Well, I actually have some opinion on this as well. Can I? I'm trying to step back here a little, but I think.
I'm kidding.
Well, yeah. So, but
fine.
moderating,
You have a lot of opinions.
Well, in terms of sustainability, I actually just gave a talk on this on Monday at GDC, around GDC. So one of the things I actually think is really important, this will be interesting on the mobile side as well, I think it's also sustainability, right? I think there are a lot of burgeoning esports, right? We're looking at League of Legends, CSGO, a lot of these environments. The biggest thing is, right, with all the money flowing in effectively, right? How do we keep the money and the sustainability in the industry, right? We have a lot of sponsors right now, I think, are more or less testing the waters with this new audience of like, you know, affluent, typically male, but also like very like mobile first or gaming first environments, right? So they're tapping into the market, they're putting in sponsorship dollars as tests. They want to see what their ROI is on the market. And I think one of the things that's very interesting with Twitch is, you know, And a lot of these platforms is the data, right? Like, do I know what my ad percentage is month to month? What is my churn? Like, what is my CPA? What are my engagement metrics? These are the things that sponsors and people with money would want to know, right? And I think for the future of esports to keep growing and to potentially actually eclipse all of sports is to actually have that structure and to understand what sustainability potentially means for that market. Beyond just, hey, it's cool. It's like in a nascent phase where we're growing. And I'm sure we've seen this a little bit in mobile as well. And I know you guys have been thinking a lot about data when you're coming from this mobile perspective. I think it'd be great to kind of hear what you guys think on what would make that sustainable and how mobile can help with that potentially. Bring it back to the panel.
Sustainability. I mean, one thing is we can start with the players, right? I don't know what the average lifespan of some of these players are for the game, for some of these games. I know usually for cooperative, competitive multiplayer games, they have a longer lifespan because it's like compared to some of the more twitchy games like CSGO or anything. So a lot of it is figuring out how to make sure the player themselves, there's enough programs or infrastructure to help them kind of, I mean, a lot of these people are 16 or 17, so they're actually probably skipping school in order to compete. And so I think like making sure that they have the necessary support and infrastructure to like continue their education, manage their businesses, probably not go into a lot of debt like some young players that got fame tend to do. So I think a lot of those programs are going to get really interesting as they come up because, I mean, a lot of it's like, think of it as how do you organize it like a professional sport, right? Like a lot of these professional sports teams have on-site staff, coaching, nutritionists, like, I don't know, like those lawyers, accountants, everyone that basically manages their business side, right? And if you look at a lot of these players, not only are they starting young and have no idea how to manage their own business or their personal brands, but they don't even have the tools to even imagine it, right? So that's probably a big area that I would see is probably first important.
Well, especially in mobile, as you guys mentioned, right? You have younger and younger audiences.
It's getting younger
you probably
and younger.
need better and better support. I mean, Clinton, being involved with Immortals, you know, there have been a lot of statements around sustainability and the way they hire as well. So I'm sure you have a perspective on this.
Yeah, I think it's something that we think a lot about is sustainability of esports long term, not just on mobile, but just esports as a new industry. And I think we think a lot about, you know, how do we be good, I think, ambassadors for esports as well, because it kind of natively grew up to where it is now, and it's become a phenomenon, and it's worldwide, but it all needs to level up, I think, from, you know, the big publishers like Riot and Valve and Blizzard, to the owners of the teams, to the teams themselves, to the players, to, you know, the fans. I think we all kind of have to level up because otherwise it could crater out. There could be any number of things that blow up, you know, scandals or, you know, in some ways right now I think Riot is running LCS as a loss leader. And unless big brands come in that are non-endemic brands to esports, so the Coca-Colas and the Geicos and the State Farms, Toyotas, the Chase Manhattans, when those big non-endemic traditional advertisers start coming into esports, I'll be a little less worried then. But I think they need to, and they should, because there's a very valuable demographic right now in esports and in mobile esports of that 14 to 24-year-old, you know, cord-cutting generation that's on mobile all the time. And if I were, you know, a State Farm or a Chase and wanted to, that audience to open up my first bank account or get insured for the first time or an American Express for the first time, I would want to get in front of those people organically and authentically. So until that happens and until we are actually over that hump where we have the big brands involved, I think there's some risk for sure.
And why do you think that big brands aren't quite as involved as they are? Like, there's some theories around the fact that, a lot of the numbers around esports aren't validated, right? Or that we can't get very good metrics around certain aspects of that. I'm sure there are other contributing factors.
I think the metrics are there. I mean, and you're a data scientist with a PhD from Harvard. Are the metrics there?
Yes.
Okay, a little plug for
hold
Anne.
on.
Well, I think no. The bigger bigger question is we all know the size is there, right? I think the bigger question is that for a lot of these big brands, the reason why they spend a lot of money on advertising and all this is they know that's the audience they want to hit because the audience that is there are the ones who are spending the money to buy their particular brands, right? And like one of the biggest things that I think is really missing in competitive sports and probably is actually better position than I say most traditional sports right now is the fact that they can build scalable, efficient business models, right? The ability to be like, hey, because this person is an LCS player, it's gonna equal X dollars in revenue. In the NFL right now, a particular fan that's like in terms of like spend index per year is about $450 per, let's say, active viewer of the NFL. In LCS, it's about $5. That means that for the engagement numbers that at least we're seeing, there's definitely a lot of opportunity for, I think, more scalable, efficient business models that just haven't existed yet. And on mobile, that's gonna be a lot easier because we know where everyone is with their mobile phone, right? It's on them at all times. And so I think a lot of it is I think what's gonna be really interesting in the next year or so is how are these people unlocking that value, right? And like being able to prove that. Once you prove that, then the wallets are gonna start opening, so.
Great.
Question.
So this is actually a bit of a follow-on. Is there any risk in relying on some of the old money and traditional advertisers to be the face and the sponsor of esports when, I mean, you've got new money and a lot of fresh brands. I think I don't know, Ubers, Lyfts, Airbnbs that I think might want to connect better with this new group, right? That might speak to them in a way that's more relevant. Is there any kind of effort to go that direction as opposed, like State Farm, for example? I mean, with people not buying cars till I think the new average age is 26, 27, and you're looking at your target group right here being 12-year-olds, they're not buying State Farm insurance.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think it's a great point. And if Uber or Lyft or Muntree or Dollar Shave Club wants to sponsor Immortals, or any of you guys out in the audience, please come up to me afterwards. I'm happy to talk. It's just they don't have as large a budgets as the Coca-Colas out there, or some of the they're not spending $50 to $500 million a year in advertising budgets. They don't have chief marketing officers who are used to opening up the wallets in a big way like that yet, but they will. And when they do, I think esports will be there, and they'll be a better fit. They'll be authentically there for them. And what we've also found is that with esports, the demographic's so young that you're not just advertising to the actual players or the fans themselves, but you're advertising to their families, so their parents, and they live in the same household, for instance, and you're advertising to them as much as you are to the players.
It's also generational too, right? Who's the one making the decisions at, all those insurance companies and, sorry, it's nodding. I'm really loud though, so it's probably okay. But it's really about who's the decision makers that are opening those pockets, right? And so probably, if you think about generations, they probably have no idea that their kids are only on YouTube now and they're not even watching TV anymore. So, I mean, if you think, if you ask your kid where they're spending most of their time, it's not glued to the television. The new Saturday morning cartoon is YouTube. So in one sense I think they are paying attention. I imagine anyone that is smart, especially in the digital marketing space, are seeing that, no, my conversions are gonna be a lot higher if I go work with a YouTube content creator than if I work with a celebrity industries. And we're definitely seeing a lot of, I would say, more forward thinking in the traditional CPG companies, thinking that way and spending and allocating their budgets, and those budgets are increasing, probably by double digits, if not triple digits, into that territory. And so a lot of that is shifting, right? But I think, especially when it comes to competitive gaming, I think what's interesting is that it's almost like no one really knows about it yet, just because it's been so small for so long. But then if you compare it to the spaces and industries that those guys are in, I mean, they've been around for hundreds of years, right? And so, but I think they're now realizing that the new millennials right now that have all the income, disposable income, are not on the channels that they used to market, right? And so they're definitely shifting their strategies accordingly.
And it does tie in a little bit to, like, if you're looking at traditional marketing spend and also especially new startup marketing spend, there's a lot around, like, what is the actual deliverable, right?
Okay.
You're looking at what is the actual deliverable or convertible, right? What is my CPA? What is my CPM? What is my CPV? Like, any of those things. And I think one of the things around competitive sports and competitive esports and certain platforms like Twitch is that those numbers still need to be relatively refined in how we get those numbers, right? So we know it exists, but how do we prove that it exists?
Right,
Which
just
you had
finding
spoken
relevant
earlier.
data, right? It's kind of like whose numbers. I mean, I would even say, like, when people talk about SaaS platforms on top of esports, it's also a big opportunity because I don't think there is reliable data that's out there outside of the game developers themselves. They probably have all the data, right? And so,
Yeah, like a Peach, for example, bit tangential. I mean, they're kind of failing. Awesome product, but failing because they don't really have platforms to really, or distribution platforms to really get to the type of This is the perfect platform, I think. And I get that, like, eventually you want to mature into the $100 million, CMOs that are opening their pockets. But in the meantime, while we're trying to get there, why not create a platform for these startups that are coming out of the Valley or coming out of Austin?
It brings up a really good point, and I just want to make this comment, but I'd love to hear some of the other questions. And it's just that, and I'll say it here, traditional sports are dying. You look at things like Major League Baseball, and it's declining by 3 to 4 to 5 to 6% per year, and it's aging up. So the average, Major League Baseball fan is 53 years old, and that's aging every year. So it's 54 next year, 55 the year after that, and kids aren't watching it anymore. They're just glued to their mobile devices or they're playing that. So long-term demographic shift, things are going to change for sure.
We'd love to take a couple more questions as we're wrapping up. So yeah, next.
Hi, I'm Devin, CEO of Convergence Gaming. My question is regarding two concerns I have about this space, and I want to see what your guys' opinion on it. Skill cap for games in the mobile space doesn't seem to be as high as games like League of Legends and Counter-Strike, where you see, like, it's very, very challenging, and that tends to attract viewership. So the question is, how do you get over that hurdle? And the second question that kind of accompanies that is with monetization. I think we can see that the activations and the engagement is there. There's no doubt that mobile is generating a ton of revenue, but mostly that's towards in-game items and things that tend to help your gameplay. So how do you balance that with the esports crowd, which is very, very anti-pay to win? So those two issues kind of, and yeah, just we'll love to hear your opinions.
I can address the second one because I think when I look at mobile gaming here in the US and in Western markets, they tend to lag behind Asia by like 1 to 2 years. The top grossing games in Asia that are mostly more competitive than not are not necessarily pay to win. Actually, if you ask, and then even in China too, if you ask all those game developers and leading game designers what they optimize for, they don't optimize for monetization, they optimize for engagement. So their KPIs that they're measuring on is day 180, day 365 retention. So here in the US, everyone's now doing day 30, day 60 retention. So it's really interesting, right? There's very few, I would say, mobile game developers that can think that far. The only probably game developer that I think have done a very good job is probably Supercell, but that's because they're like the way that they think about and release product is probably really different than probably most other game developers I think about, because they think about 10-year franchises, not necessarily 1 to 2 years and quick buck. So I think a lot of that is that it's possible. I think it's possible. A lot of it is just no one has really figured it out yet, or at least how to get, because it's really hard to get a mobile game, especially at the rate of device maturing and upgrades and a lot of stuff, because it accelerates. It's a lot. The power of a device and also the broadband penetration that's happening on mobile right now is changing and evolving a lot quicker than it has on the PC and console space.
Is the viewership there though? Like is there a demonstratable viewership for this? Because like a lot of esports have tried like to get these kind of consistent viewers, and you just don't see the LCS numbers in these other esports. So how do you get over that challenge?
Well, I mean, there was one Clash Royale stream that happened that got featured on Twitch, and that catapulted that game to number 3. So I would say it's happening. So.
Did you have input?
Sure,
Ryan,
with
on the
respect to
competitive-
skill
cap,
cap,
yeah.
Yeah.
one of the things that I found the most interesting about trying to be a creative designer in this space was I like different traditional sports and don't see them as having an equivalent skill cap, but having other components that are within the designer's tool chest to try to come up with something that balances a lot of excitement with some acceptance of the platform, the way that you're going to be, two-handing your device and the limits that entails. So when we started designing our game, we wanted immediately to try to find some way to integrate other sports so that we could get the excitement. Like for instance, we didn't want to do a straight MOBA rip. We wanted to do something that had some payload component, and we wanted to do something that felt a little bit more like a fighting game. So there came time limits, and then there came a whole lot of other things that are behavior that it's harder to describe. It's easier to experience, but they're there on purpose to offload the long cycle strategic decision making that certainly for the audience that's excited about today's esports, they're into all of that. I think a lot like our 50-something-year-old baseball watcher. And when we come up with a new product, we're going after something, well, I'm talking specifically about Call of Champions, where we're getting to that very, very high pitch of emotion for the participants and the viewers, but with trade-offs in terms of what that direct skill cap relationship is. So I think it's harder to wrestle than it is to play soccer. That's my opinion. And I think that it may be a little bit more difficult to hit a baseball than it would be for me to do a tackle. Well, 20 years ago. But those things are part of where the adaptive game designer needs to think about how they enter the market with their soul, with the emotion and expression they want to get there. But what Clinton was saying earlier, which should be terrifying to everybody who wants to make a product in this space, is that leveling up. And what this discussion is all about is your key talent needs to be aware that there are creative, skill-related, viewership-related concerns, all of those, and be able to absorb them in a way that doesn't completely toxify what they're trying to do. Great question.
All right, great question.
Thank you.
Let's take one more quick one.
I think we only have one more.
Yeah, one more quick one.
Hey guys, I had a question about I guess esports in general. We touched on it a little bit earlier. A lot of the competitive players are younger in age, right? Yeah. So what are your thoughts on player protection as far as potential player? I think Stephen Ellis is here, player unions, contract management, things like that, because these are young kids coming in, and we've seen already some of them being taken advantage of. So just curious your thoughts on player protection.
Well, it definitely has to happen. But
Yeah, I mean, we talked about sustainability and risks before, and I think that's one of them. And I truly believe that there should be players' unions. There should be, more protections for the players. And when Noah and I co-founded Immortals as an esports organization, we wanted to help lead the way. And so we're very clear that, we offer, W-2 salaried employees and full medical benefits to all of our players and to our staff. And we think that that needs to be that way to be sustainable. We think that there also should be transparency, in salaries and in benefits. Maybe we're not quite ready for it yet, but we think that it should be there, and that there needs to be player unions. The players are professional athletes. They're qualified as professional athletes by the US government for visas. We brought over 2 of the best players in the world on professional athletic visas, and they should be treated like that. So totally agree with you on that. It's got to be there.
Do you think that's up to the game developers of the sport, or up to the owners or the players, or whose responsibility
It's up to all of us. I don't know if you work for Riot. Looks like you work for Riot. I think it's up to Riot, it's up to Blizzard,
Right.
it's up to Activision, and it's up to the owners too, to allow that to happen and to encourage that to happen. And then, from the former players like Stephen Ellis, Snoopy, and others who are out there to really help to push it in that direction, because I think that creates something that's sustainable and that I want to be a part of long term, and that's going to be helpful for the industry.
Is there a conflict of interest in this up to those guys?
That's what I was saying. I think
No, short term, honestly, short term, maybe it's against our interest because, look, all player salaries will then be, everybody's going to be able to negotiate against the owners. But long term and medium term, it's absolutely with our interest as owners to have players essentially organized and for there to be more transparency in the system. And I think it also creates more security for big brands to come in as well, and to know that the players and the athletes are taken care of.
Regulations.
Yeah, regulations need to happen
it's
as well.
just checks and balances, right? So,
Yeah.
Right. And I think everyone has to work together, but like you said, it probably potentially has to be someone also neutral, right? Or some neutral regulating body. Anyway, so on that note, I think we're pretty much out of time, but I think everyone will be around after the panel, and feel free to come up or find us outside, and they can answer any other questions. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.